Welcome back. So now we have a Logger factory. Let's try to create some tables in the database. And let's go and do it by actually going to the context first and talk a little bit about how you represent tables in DB context. You actually do it by adding simple properties like this. The property type will be DBSet, and here you specify what entity you want to use in the table. And the entity is pretty much just an object explaining that for this table I'm going to need a column with the name of ID. It's going to be an auto-incremented integer, etc., etc. But all of this will be set up for us. But in order to do it, we need to specify our entities. And you might think that an entity is the same as a model, but actually it's not. Let's have a look at the video model right here. A video model is a way for us to represent the real world in software. That's what we use the models for. Now, if you look at this model right here, it has a genre in there, but it doesn't know about a genre ID, for instance. Inside the genre there is an ID, but right here in the video it doesn't know about the genre ID. If we're talking about a relational table like SQL is, then we actually normally would need something like this to say that we're going to have relation between the genre and the video by adding some kind of genre ID to make that relation available. Now, if we start doing this, we'll start to put the relational world into our models, which means that we're going to break the idea with the clean architecture. The onion, the center of the application, should not be changed because infrastructure information or the outside world want to change it. So that's not allowed. What we're going to do instead is we're going to make entities. And each entity is going to represent one of these models in the database. So let's go and make a couple of entities. First, I'll make the simple one, and that will be the genre. So we'll make a genre entity right here. There we go. Simple entity, all it's going to have is pretty much the same properties for now, just like a normal genre. It's going to have an int ID, and it's going to have an int name right here, or sorry, a string name. There we go. So we have these two entities now. Perfect. Now the second entity, sorry, the two properties, the second entity is going to be the video entity. So let's go and create that class, video entity. There we go. And that entity is, I'm just going to be lazy right now, just try to grab everything I need from the old entity right here. I want all these stories from the old model. I'll put that down to the new entity. There we go. And I'll just import the date time like this and get rid of that question mark because I don't want this to be allowed to be null. It's a primary key. It's not allowed to be null. The second thing I want to do is I want, instead of adding an actual genre right here, I'm just going to for now add a simple genre ID. So I'll make an int genre ID like this, and there we go. Now we pretty much set it up, and I'll actually call it a genre entity ID, just to be precise that this genre ID right here maps to the genre entity that we have right here. Because actually behind the scenes, Microsoft had built it so that if you have a genre entity that ends with ID here, it knows, it kind of tries to map to a foreign key inside the genre entity right here. So automatically it should set up foreign key relations, and also it should set up automatically primary key information with the ID right here. And actually I could also call this the video entity ID. It would still be the primary key. And I could also call this the genre entity ID, and it would also automatically be the primary key. But Microsoft has naming conventions that says if we have an entity and we have the name ID, that's probably the primary key. If we have an entity and we have an ID, that's probably the primary key. And if we have an entity that has a genre entity ID to another class, using the name for the class and ending with ID, we probably have a foreign key. So that's how it's all set up. Now let's try and go to the DB context in order to set up these new tables we just built. First, let's make our new genre entity table, and let's just call it genres. We can put in any name here, and later I'll show you how you can configure these using something called the Fluent API. We're going to need another prop, so I'm going to just add another prop right here. It's going to be DBSet like this again, and it's going to be a video entity this time. There we go, and let's just call it videos, and that's all I had to do. Now I actually have two tables in my database. Let's try and rerun the code, and I'll just show you if that is actually the case. Now it actually starts to write the commands for me right here. That's pretty amazing. So what can I see right here? Well, I can see it's calling create table an SQL query right here for SQLite. It creates a table called genre, and it adds an ID that's not null, and it's the primary genre key, and it's auto incremented. You just got that information. Yeehaw! Let's check out the video because that's a bit more complex. But actually you'll notice that the video is going to again have a constraint for a primary key right here, and it's also going to add a title, that's the text, release date, storyline. This one is not allowed to be null, and that's probably because it's a date, and SQLite tries to convert a date into text, it seems. Different in an MS SQL, but here in SQLite it's a text field. And the final thing we can see is the genre ID is here as well, and it's also set to an integer. Now it doesn't seem there's a foreign key constraint. We'll set that up later with the Fluent API, but I'm not sure that foreign key constraints are the same in an SQLite as they are in an MS SQL database. But the cool thing here is notice that you can actually see now exactly what queries are run, and if you go ahead and run the same queries using just an SQL tool, you would actually be able to get the same result.